Chapter 17 of Against Odds by Lawrence L. Lynch. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Chapter 17 Those Two Women. My friend the guard had received a blow upon the head, painful but not fatal. He would be about in a few days, the hospital surgeon said, but in spite of the fact that I visited the hospital every day, 5 days passed before I was allowed to speak to him or he was allowed to talk. I was very anxious for this opportunity, for I had now a new reason for my growing interest in the young fellow who so stubbornly refused to give me a name by which to call him. He was enrolled among the guards as L. Carr, and I at once adopted this name in speaking to or of him. I had determined at the first moment possible to have a confidential talk with him, confidential upon my part at least, and I meant to win his confidence if possible. In the meantime I had laid all the story of this day's adventures before Dave Brainerd, beginning with the discovery in the newspaper, and my search up town and down for trace of missing Gerald Trent, and I ended by adding to all the rest a few ideas and opinions of my own, which caused Dave, in spite of his lately expressed lofty opinion of my imaginative qualities, first to open his eyes, and then to roar with laughter. But he was my hearty second at the last, even to the point of agreeing with me that, if we could accomplish but the one end, it were better to find and rescue Gerald Trent if he were living and in duress, which we both doubted, or to solve the mystery of his fate if dead, than to arrest a pair or a trio of counterfeiters or possible diamond robbers. As to Miss Jenrys and the mysterious guard, he would no more have given up the thought of solving the problem of the brunette's pursuit of these two than would I at the moment, but we needed all the light possible, and we agreed at once that to obtain this it would be wise at this point to make certain confidences to the two persons most interested. As to the elusive brunette, her shadow had followed her for days more faithfully and at closer quarters than we could have done, because of his small stature and his easily managed lightning changes, managed by the aid of a reversible jacket, 3 or 4 vari-coloured silk handkerchiefs, and 2 or 3 hats or caps, all stuffed into convenient pockets. But his report was, after all, far from complete or conclusive. "I follered her," he declared, "till my legs ached, and I never seen a woman 'at could get over the ground like her. Ever since that first trip my legs had been stiff." The boy had followed her on the first day by devious ways, and until after midday, without losing sight of her, and had lost her at last, as Dave and myself had lost our quarry, in the intricacies of the Plaisance. "You see," Billy had said, "'twas this way. She stopped afore one of them Arab places," he meant Turkish, "where there was a pay show, and she must 'a' got her ticket ahead, for she just sort of held out a card or somethin' afore his eyes, and went right in, and I had to wait till 2 or 3 fellers got tickets 'fore 'twas my turn, and when I got in she wa'n't nowhere." A look of boyish disgust emphasized the emphasis here. "But wherever she was, she stayed a good while," Bill went on, "and then, all at once, out she came agin, and went into another big place close by, and I went in too that time. She went round behind a big table where they had piles of gimcracks, and popped behind a curtain, and just as I was gettin' scared for fear she was gone agin, out she came and took the place of a tired lookin' woman that set on a high stool sellin' the gimcracks. She had took off her hat and things, and she had on a little red jacket all spangled up, and a red cap, like the Turks all wear, with big gold tassels on it, and she made herself blacker round the eyes and redder in the cheeks, and she looked just sassy." At least it was something to have our theories in regard to the lurking places of this trio verified. It was something to feel sure, as we now did, that these people were quartered in the Plaisance, but I felt very sure that they had more than one hiding place, probably each of them a separate one, as well as a general rendezvous. I questioned the lad closely regarding the tired looking woman, whom he described as tallish and slim and not much on looks, but dressed in Turkish fez and zouave jacket, and painted thick. He had watched her till evening came, and then the tallish woman had returned and the brunette had stepped behind the curtain once more. "I watched that doggoned curtain," Bill declared, "till 'twas time to shut up shop, and she didn't come out, and I couldn't get in." "Did anyone else come from behind that curtain while you waited, Bill?" I asked him carelessly. "Yes, there was. Pretty soon after she went in, a young Turk came out, smallish, with a little dudey moustache. He had a pitcher in his hand, and he smacked the tired woman on the back, and stuck the pitcher under her nose, and went out." "Did he come back?" "Come to think, I guess he didn't. I know he didn't." "Well, Bill," I said, "I can't blame you. I only blame myself. But if you should see that woman go behind a curtain or door again, and presently see a man come out, if he is the same in size and looks, anything like the one you saw to night, you just follow him, and you'll be on the right track." "Jimmy Nettie!" "And, Bill, I want you to be on the Plaisance in the morning, early, and if the brunette starts out, don't lose her. If she has not appeared by noon, you may go down to the plaza and look about there, but get back to Midway by 3 o'clock. She'll show herself there, sooner or later." The next day Bill had nothing to report. The day following he had followed her, late in the afternoon, when she had emerged from the Turkish Bazaar, down Midway, and had seen her stop and speak to one of the guards. Then she had left the grounds by a Midway gate, opposite Hagenbeck's lion circus, you know. "And I followed her," he continued, "till she came to that restaurant where you and me seen her get the letter. She turned off right by the Midway gate, and went across to Washington Avenue, and down that till she turned to come to the restaurant. 'Twas most supper time, and she didn't come out no more, I'm sure, for I watched till almost midnight, and there weren't no back way, I know, for I looked." I could well believe that she had taken a room as near the grounds as possible, where she might rest when rest was required, and she was off duty; and I did not doubt but that Delbras and Greenback Bob had each a similar lair outside the White City, but conveniently near it. This last report had been made to us on the morning of my visit to Miss Jenrys, Bill having appeared at our quarters at an early hour, and I had been studying the expediency of letting Miss Jenrys into the history of her brunette acquaintance, as far as I myself knew it, before visiting the two ladies, at last deciding that I would wait a little and be guided by circumstances, the episode of Gerald Trent's disappearance finally putting it altogether out of my mind. On the afternoon after the attempt to drown the guard, Dave and I waited for a time in our room, expecting a report from Bill which might, we hoped, throw some light upon the events of the night before. But he did not appear, and after breakfasting together, Dave went back to our room to await him, while I made haste toward the emergency hospital, where our wounded guard lay, carefully watched, skilfully attended, and not permitted to talk or receive visitors. Assured that his recovery would be only a matter of days, I went back to find Dave still alone, and this time we both set out, after leaving a message with the janitor, Dave to look after the men who had been detailed upon our business in different directions and to hear their reports, and I to see that more men were at work upon the Trent case before I ventured, as I was most anxious to do, upon a visit to Miss Jenrys and her aunt. Having done what I could in the Trent case, I found it nearing noon when I approached their place of residence, but I had little fear of finding them absent, and was hastening on, only a few paces from their door, when I saw Monsieur Voisin come hastily out, and after seeming to hesitate a moment upon the threshold, run down the steps and move rapidly away southward. I could see that his face wore a sombre look, and I wondered if he had seen me in the hasty glance he had cast about him. There were others upon the pavement between him and myself, and I trusted that he had not. Still, I felt a strange reluctance to being seen by this man so often in the same place, and I slackened my pace and finally stood still, reading the "To Lets" upon the opposite houses, until he turned the corner and went, as I was very sure, to the Midway entrance a little way beyond. I found the ladies at home, and eager to hear the little I had to tell them regarding the Trent case. I had put a good man in the hotel where Trent had stopped, to find out, if possible, whether the young Bostonian had been spotted and followed from that place by any swell adventurer, and I arranged with the mistress of the place where Trent had secured rooms to hold them until I heard from Boston whether any or all would come on and occupy the rooms and assist in the search. Miss Jenrys felt sure they would come, all of them. "Hilda O'Neil will not rest until she is here, as near the place where he was last seen as possible. You were very thoughtful to secure the rooms," she sighed heavily. "I suppose now we must simply wait until we receive the picture," she added. "There is little else to do," I replied. "Of course, I have had other advertisements inserted in various papers, and have offered a reward, as you directed." "Ah!" she sighed again, "we may hear from that." "I doubt it," I replied. "If he has been abducted, it is too soon for that." And then I turned the conversation by saying: "I have some news from your friend, the brunette." "My friend? Mr. Masters!" "Pardon me, your satellite, then. She was revolving near you the day before yesterday." At this point the door opened, and a voice said: "Miss Ross, the laundress is here about your washing." Miss Ross rose with alacrity, a benevolent smile upon her sweet face. "Mr. Masters," she said, "thee must save thy story or tell it twice over, for I must beg thee to excuse me now. I can't send this poor woman away, and I ought not to make her wait." "It is one of Aunt Ann's protégées," explained Miss Jenrys, "and she has come by appointment." Mentally thankful for this interruption, I assured Miss Ross that my story should wait, and when she had left us alone I turned at once to Miss Jenrys. "I am glad of this opportunity," I began at once, "for I have something to tell you which I prefer to make known to you first, although I should have told my story, even in your aunt's presence, if necessary, before leaving to day." And as directly as possible I told of my acquaintance with the handsome guard. Beginning with her encounter with the Turkish palanquin bearers, I described my interview with the guard, repeated his words, his questions concerning her welfare, his statement that she was not a stranger to him, and then, with her interest and her curiosity well roused, I described him. "I wonder who it can be," she had murmured before I began my description, and I kept a secret watch upon her features, while I said: "He is a tall young fellow, and very straight and square shouldered, though somewhat slender. He is blond, with close cropped hair that is quite light, almost golden, and inclined to curl where it has attained an inch of growth. He wears a moustache that is but little darker than his hair, and is kept close trimmed. He has a broad, full forehead, honest, open blue eyes, not pale blue, but a fine, deep colour, and they meet one frankly and fearlessly. His mouth is really too handsome for a man, but his chin is firm enough to counterbalance that. His manners are fine, and he has evidently been reared a gentleman. I chanced to hear him sing last night, and he has a wonderfully high tenor voice, an unusual voice, clear and sweet, and soft in the highest notes." Before I had finished my description, I saw clearly that she recognized the picture. Her colour had changed, and changed again, from red to pale, but I made no pause, telling how I had seen him in conversation with the little brunette, and what he had told me of that conversation, and then I described the adventure of the previous night. When I had reached the point where I had offered my card and he had refused to give me a false name, I saw her eyes glow and her head lift itself unconsciously. When I described him in converse with the wily brunette, a slight frown crossed her face, and her little foot tapped an impatient tattoo quite unconsciously. When I pictured him as following the two women toward the wooded island, her head was lifted again and her lip curled scornfully. But when I had reached the point where the two figures, springing suddenly from the darkness behind him, had hurled him over the parapet into the deepest part of the lagoon, a low moan burst from her lips, and she put out her hands entreatingly. "Was he? Quick, tell me!" "He was rescued, unconscious but living, by two of the emergency crew who guard the lagoons by night, who, luckily, were lying in their skiff under the shadow of the bridge. engaged in watching the mysterious movements of the very men who were lurking behind the big pedestal on the other side of the pier, awaiting the signal from the women, their confederates. In going over, his head was quite seriously hurt. At first it was thought that he had struck the edge of the boat in falling, but the doctor says it was a blow from some blunt instrument with a round end, some manner of club, no doubt." "And now how is he?" she faltered. "In very good hands, and doing as well as can be expected. I was not allowed to see him, and he does not seem fully conscious, although the doctor says he may recover if all goes well." "Where is he?" Her face was very pale, but there was a change in her voice, a sudden firmness, and a total lack of hesitancy. "At the emergency hospital in the fair grounds. I had purposely made his case as seriously as I consistently could, and I now made the important plunge. Miss Jenrys, I have taken a great interest in this young man from the first. He is a fine fellow, and now, added to this personal liking, is the duty I owe this helpless young man, who evidently has an enemy, and that enemy seemingly the very person who has been dogging you so persistently and so mysteriously. You see the strangeness of the complication. Are you willing to help me?" "I?" she hesitated. "How?" "This young man knows you. Do you not know him?" "I almost believe so." "And are you under any vow or promise of secrecy? He lies there, unknown, friendless, and he has an enemy near at hand. I want to serve him, but to do this intelligently I must know him." She hesitated a moment, and then, to my surprise, arose quite calmly, went to her desk, and came back with a photograph in her hand. "Look at that," she said, and held it out to me. It was a group of tennis players upon a sunlit lawn, one of those instantaneous pictures in which amateurs delight, but it was clear, and the faces were very distinct. One of them I recognized at once as the subject of our conversation. He wore in the picture a light tennis suit, and his handsome head was bare, but I knew the face at once, and told her so. "That," she said, "is a picture of a Mr. Lossing, whom I knew quite well for a season in New York. Shortly before Lent he left the city, it was said, and I have heard and known nothing of him since. And, pardon me, it's very unusual for a young man of society to take up the work he has chosen. Do you know any reason for this?" "None whatever. He seemed to be well supplied with money. So far as I can judge, I confess I never thought before of his fortune or lack of it." A sudden flush mantled her face, and her eyes dropped. I wondered if she was thinking of that letter to Hilda O'Neil. "It's a delicate point," I said musingly. "If we could learn something of his situation. He is very proud. Do you think that your friend Monsieur Voisin might possibly know something?" She put up her hand quickly, imperiously. "If Mr. Lossing has chosen to conceal himself from his friends, we have no right to make his presence here known to Monsieur Voisin." She checked herself and coloured beautifully again. "You are right," I said promptly. I had no real thought of asking Monsieur Voisin into our counsels, and I had now verified the suspicions I had held from the first, fitting the guard's statement and his personality into the story her letter told, that he was the Mr. Lossing from whom she had parted so stormily in the conservatory on the night of her aunt's reception. And now, as I consulted my watch, she leaned toward me, and suddenly threw aside her reserve. "Can you guess," she asked eagerly, "how he came to meet those women in that way? It was a meeting, was it not?" "No doubt of that. It was also a scheme to entrap him." "But how did they do it? How did they lure him to that bridge, those two women?" I could not suppress a smile. "Can you guess? It must be only a guess on my part, you know, but I fancy that in her talk with him that afternoon the brunette led him to think that you would not be unwilling to see him. I particularly noted that the woman with her was about your height, and that she wore a hat much like the one worn by you on the day I first saw you. Now that I recall their manoeuvres of last night, I remember that the hat almost concealed her face, and that they kept in the shadow." She did not follow up the subject, but after a moment said: "Do you think I might be allowed to see him if I went with auntie to the hospital? I mean now, to day. Could you not say that we knew him?" "It is quite important that you should do so," I declared unblushingly. "You are the only one who can identify him. And now if I am to tell Miss Ross all these things—" "Pardon me," she broke in, "if it will not matter, I would rather tell Aunt Ann, at least about Mr. Lossing." I arose hastily. "In that case I will leave it to you willingly, and if you will come with your aunt, say at 2 o'clock, I will meet you at any place you may choose, and take you to the hospital. Or would you rather go alone?" "Oh, no, no!" she exclaimed. "We shall be glad of your escort. Indeed, I should fear to venture else." CHAPTER 18